Before we jump into this crazy story, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Maybe you're in a quiet cul-de-sac in Arizona, a bustling apartment complex in New York, or a calm lakeside cabin up in Minnesota. I love seeing just how far these Karen tales of chaos and karma can reach. The water was glittering like liquid glass when I first spotted her, my yacht sliding away from the dock without me. It wasn't the slow, careful maneuver of a professional captain. No, this was reckless, loud, and laced with champagne fumes. Music thundered across the harbor, the thump of bass ricocheting off the pilings, mingling with the salty air. My gut tightened. On the bow, framed by a garland of pink and white flowers that had no business being there, stood Patricia Clarkson in a maroon bridesmaid dress that strained at the seams. Her older sister Cheryl was right beside her, clutching the polished railing, arm extended in a dramatic gesture like a queen blessing her subjects. They weren't waving to me. They were taunting me. Even from this distance I could see Patricia's lips form a sentence I didn't need to hear to understand. Too late now. I didn't run. Not yet. I stood there for a moment, jaw locked, fists curling, as my mind replayed every single warning I'd given them over the past week. I could smell the faint trace of my boat's engine exhaust mixing with the scent of salt water, could hear the laughter of the guests on board, people clinking champagne glasses, shouting to each other like they were on a cruise they paid for. My yacht gleamed under the midday sun, every line of its hull screaming expensive maintenance and careful ownership. And now it was their stage. 2 weeks earlier, this whole nightmare had been nothing more than an HOA meeting gone wrong. I'd been sitting in the back of the clubhouse, sipping stale coffee, while Patricia and Cheryl monopolized the floor. They were impossible to ignore. Patricia's voice carried like she had a built-in megaphone, and Cheryl's habit of finishing her sister's sentences made them sound like some synchronized act. They were deep into a tirade about how hard it was to find a worthy venue for their brother Mark's wedding. Everything was either too tacky or too expensive, or just not special enough for our family. I'd made the mistake of speaking up. I told them, half-jokingly, that I offered harbor cruises for events. Weddings, anniversaries, you name it. I even offered them a generous discount since they were neighbors. Patricia didn't even turn her head when she laughed. "We wouldn't be caught dead on a workboat," she said, her tone dripping with derision. Cheryl smirked and added, "But thanks for the suggestion." They moved on to discussing imported roses and a string quartet, and I let it go. Or I thought I had. 2 days before the wedding, I came back from a supply run to the marina and nearly dropped my tool bag when I saw it. My yacht, the Silver Dawn, was covered in people, decorators, caterers, 2 guys with a ladder. Pink and white garlands hung from the railings, fabric draped over the bow, ribbons tied neatly at the stern. The deck glistened with a fresh wash, and the air smelled like roses and lemon polish. I walked down the dock, each step faster than the last. "Patricia," I shouted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. She appeared from the upper deck like a stage actress hitting her cue, one hand on her hip. "Oh, Ryan, you're just in time to see the transformation." Cheryl popped up beside her, beaming like a proud co-conspirator. "Isn't it gorgeous? This is going to be the wedding of the year." "It's my boat," I said flatly. Patricia waved a dismissive hand. "Relax. You weren't using it this weekend, and Mark needed something truly memorable. Besides, think of it as free publicity for your little tours." I stepped onto the gangway. "This isn't free anything. You didn't ask. You didn't book. You didn't even get a captain. This is illegal." Cheryl rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. We've already got a guy. He's perfectly qualified." "Perfectly qualified," I repeated, my voice low. "Where'd you find him?" "Craigslist." Her silence told me everything I needed to know. I tried reason. I explained insurance, liability, fuel costs, the fact that it was against marina regulations. They countered every point with mockery, Cheryl muttering to Patricia about how some people just love to overcomplicate things. Patricia finally leaned in, her perfume so strong it stung my nose. "Ryan, don't be petty. It's family. You'll survive." That night, I sat in my office at the marina, scrolling through the security footage on my laptop. They were hauling in cases of champagne, a portable speaker system, even a rented archway for the ceremony. The yacht looked like the set of a reality TV wedding special. One clip caught Cheryl directing a team of decorators, her hands flapping like a conductor. Another showed Mark stepping aboard, arms wide, soaking in the attention like a king surveying his kingdom. By morning, I'd already decided this was going to blow up in their faces. I didn't know how yet, but I could feel the inevitability of it in my bones. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could intercept them before they left. The marina was already buzzing. Guests in formal wear milled around the dock, taking selfies with the yacht in the background. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses carried over the gentle slap of water against the hull. I spotted Melissa, the bride, on the upper deck. She looked beautiful in a long white dress, but her smile was thin, her eyes darting around like she was already regretting something. The hired captain, a sunburned man in a cheap polo, was fiddling with the controls like they were an alien language. Patricia was barking orders from the bow, while Cheryl fussed with her dress. Mark was busy shaking hands and pretending he was some kind of celebrity. I pushed through the crowd on the dock. Patricia. Cheryl. You can't just take off. Patricia leaned over the railing, her maroon dress catching the sunlight, making the color blaze against the white yacht. It's a wedding, Ryan, not a crime scene. Try to enjoy yourself for once. The yacht's engine rumbled to life. Guests cheered. Someone popped a champagne cork, the spray catching the light in a brief rainbow before splattering onto the deck. I felt heat rising in my chest. This wasn't just arrogance, it was ownership. They decided my property was theirs to use, and no amount of protest from me was going to change that. The lines came off the cleats. The hired captain pushed the throttle. The Silver Dawn eased away from the dock, its bow cutting through the shimmering water like a knife. I shouted one last time, but Patricia only smiled and raised her glass in a mock toast. Cheryl followed suit, her grin sharp as a blade. The yacht turned toward open water. The music swelled, the crowd roared, and the distance between us grew. For a moment I stood frozen, the sounds of the dock fading under the thump of bass from my own speakers, now far out in the harbor. My phone was in my hand, but I didn't dial anyone. Not yet. I just watched jaw tight as my boat, my pride and joy, sailed off under their command. Somewhere behind me, a neighbor muttered, "Those Clarkson sisters really think they own this place." I didn't answer. I was too busy tracking the angle of the sun, the pull of the tide, and the faint smirk curling at the corner of my mouth. They thought this was the best day of their lives. They had no idea what was coming. The moment the Silver Dawn disappeared beyond the first line of breakwater, my body finally moved. I broke into a run along the dock, scanning for any vessel I could use to intercept them, but every slip was occupied and every captain already had their own schedule. The sun was climbing higher, glaring off the water, making it harder to see the fine details of my yacht as it headed for the wide blue beyond. I reached the marina office and yanked open the door, startling the young clerk behind the counter. "Get me Harbor Patrol," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He fumbled with the phone, dialed, then handed it over. The operator's voice was calm, almost bored, as I explained that my yacht had just been taken without my consent. When I gave her the name Patricia Clarkson, she paused only long enough to say, "We'll need proof it was unauthorized." "It's my boat," I snapped. "I have security footage, registration, insurance, everything." She asked if I wanted to file an official stolen vessel report. My eyes flicked toward the harbor, to where the Silver Dawn was now just a gleaming speck in the distance. Filing the report would mean a full investigation, statements, paperwork, hours of delay. "Hold off," I said finally. "They're not going anywhere I can't find them." When I stepped back outside, the air felt heavier, the salt sting sharper. The dock had quieted. Most of the guests were gone, ferried to the yacht earlier or milling around on board. A few stragglers whispered to each other, pretending not to stare at me. One of them, a neighbor named Wilson, shook his head. "You're not going to win against them, Ryan. The Clarksons know every person on the HOA board." His words hung in the air, but I didn't respond. My focus had narrowed to the one advantage I still had, an advantage they didn't know existed. Inside my office, I booted up my laptop and opened the navigation control software linked to the yacht systems. A crisp map appeared on the screen, dotted with boats moving through the channel. One small icon pulsed at the edge of the harbor, the Silver Dawn. They'd hired some random captain, which meant they were relying on him to get them wherever they needed to be. But my boat wasn't just any vessel. It was outfitted with a GPS-linked autopilot system I could override remotely. I zoomed in, watching as they crept farther from shore, the plotted course clearly pointing toward a scenic stretch of coastline about 3 miles south. I knew that route. It hugged the shore at first, then opened into a wider stretch where the currents could be tricky if you didn't understand them. If the captain made the wrong adjustments, they'd drift. And with the tide moving the way it was today, they'd drift farther than they'd like. I leaned back, feeling the faint stirrings of a plan. They'd mocked me, humiliated me, and treated my property like their personal playground. But there was one thing Patricia and Cheryl didn't understand about boats. You could dress them up in flowers and lace, but the sea didn't care. And neither did I. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. It was Cheryl, her tone syrupy and fake. "Ryan, you didn't have to be so dramatic back there. We're going to have an amazing day, and you'll be glad we used your yacht when you see the pictures." "Glad," I repeated, my voice flat. "That's an interesting choice of word." She breezed past it. "Anyway, we'll be back before sunset. Try not to worry." I ended the call without a word. Through the binoculars I kept in my office, I could just make out Patricia on the bow, her maroon dress catching the wind as she posed for photos. The music carried faintly over the water, brassy horns and a steady beat. The sound of indulgence. The sound of people who believed they'd gotten away with it. I closed the binoculars and returned to the navigation panel. With a few keystrokes, I adjusted their autopilot path. Instead of skimming the coastline, the Silver Dawn would veer gradually into deeper waters. The shift was subtle, something the untrained I wouldn't catch until it was too late. Back on board, I imagined Patricia complaining about the breeze messing up her hair, while Cheryl fussed over seating arrangements. None of them would notice the growing gap between yacht and shore, not until the skyline shrank into a hazy line. I left the office and walked to the end of the dock, the binoculars hanging from my neck. The sun had shifted, and the air had warmed, carrying the faint tang of seaweed. I could picture the sequence of events with eerie clarity. Guests starting to murmur, the captain looking uncertain, Patricia insisting everything was fine, Cheryl hissing in her ear. I didn't want them in danger. I wanted them uncomfortable. I wanted them rattled. And most of all, I wanted them to understand that they were not untouchable. Hours passed in slow increments. I sat at a cafe overlooking the harbor, sipping iced coffee and occasionally checking the GPS. The Silver Dawn was now 4 miles out, drifting in a lazy arc toward open sea. They'd probably just finished the ceremony. Someone would be giving a toast. The bride might be smiling for the cameras, hiding her unease. The cafe owner wandered over. "That your yacht out there?" I nodded without looking up from the binoculars. "She's headed pretty far," he remarked. "Not the usual route." I allowed myself a thin smile. "Yeah, I noticed." Another hour, and the first signs of trouble appeared on the GPS. The yacht's speed had slowed. The course line was wobbling. Through the binoculars, I could see a small cluster of people gathered near the helm, the captain gesturing animatedly. Patricia was on her phone, no doubt trying to reach me again. I didn't answer when it rang. The tide was doing the rest of the work now, nudging them farther into the expanse, where the shoreline became little more than a distant smudge. I imagined mood shifting on board, laughter fading, music turned down, people glancing over the railings with a hint of worry. Even the champagne would taste different when paired with uncertainty. Melissa, the bride, would be watching the horizon, wondering how long until they were back. Mark would be trying to reassure her, probably blaming the hired captain. And Patricia and Cheryl? They'd be clinging to the illusion of control, telling everyone to just enjoy the day, while their own anxiety gnawed at the edges. By late afternoon, The Silver Dawn was almost 5 miles out. I could have brought them back then. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted them to feel the isolation, the creeping awareness that they weren't in charge anymore. As the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the rippling water, I finally picked up when Patricia called. Her voice was higher than usual, tight with irritation and a trace of fear. "Ryan, we need you to tell the captain how to get us back. Something's wrong with the controls." "Is that so?" I said lightly. "Yes," she snapped. "We've been circling for the last half hour, and people are getting nervous. This is not the time for one of your moods." I let the silence stretch before answering. "You're the ones who took my yacht without permission. You made it your wedding venue. You told me to relax." "I'm relaxed." "This isn't funny," she hissed. "It's not meant to be," I said. "But maybe it's educational." Her breath caught, as if she just realized there was more at play here than a navigation error. "Ryan, where are we?" I could hear voices in the background. Cheryl arguing with the captain, Mark demanding someone fix this. The sound was pure satisfaction. "You're out at sea," I said. "But don't worry. You'll find your way back eventually." I hung up. From the cafe window, I watched the Silver Dawn drifting under a sky streaked with pink and orange. Somewhere out there, Patricia and Cheryl were finally feeling something they'd never experienced before. Powerlessness. And I wasn't finished with them yet. The first signs of panic reached me not through the GPS, but in the rising pitch of Patricia's voice on the next call. It came just as the last sliver of sun began to dip behind the horizon, staining the sea with streaks of molten orange. She didn't bother with pleasantries this time. "Ryan, I swear, if you don't get us back to shore right now, I will." Her words cut off in a burst of static, replaced by a flurry of background noise. Guests murmuring, the captain protesting, Cheryl shouting over him. I waited for her to start again, my gaze fixed on the faint silhouette of the Silver Dawn in the distance, its lights a small constellation against the darkening water. When her voice returned, it was ragged. "People are seasick. The food's running low. We can't keep the music going because the generator's almost out of fuel. Fix this." There it was, the fraying edge I'd been waiting for. All day they had been swaddled in their illusion of control, believing their charm, their arrogance, could bend reality. But out there, on the open water, stripped of shore and safety, they were just people. And people could crack. "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice measured, "this is what happens when you take something that isn't yours." "Don't give me your moral lecture," she snapped. But the bite in her tone was dulled by desperation. "Then listen to the practical one," I replied. "That captain you hired doesn't know these waters. He's been fighting the current for hours, and now you're nearly 6 miles out. If the tide shifts again, it'll take you even longer to make it back." I could hear Cheryl's voice in the background, demanding to know what I'd said. Patricia must have covered the phone, because the sound went muffled for a moment, then came back sharp. "We didn't steal it. We borrowed it. That's not the same thing. Tell that to the Harbor Patrol when they meet you," I said. She went quiet. The silence was so sudden it was almost theatrical. Then, slowly, she said, "You wouldn't." But she didn't sound convinced. The first flash of blue light appeared on the horizon as I ended the call. The Harbor Patrol boats were fast, faster than the Silver Dawn, with her drained generator and clueless helmsman. I knew exactly how this was going to unfold, and the knowledge brought with it a grim, slow-burning satisfaction. I stayed where I was as the patrol vessels closed the distance, their engines sending ripples across the otherwise calm water. Through my binoculars, I watched the scene play out. 2 officers boarded the yacht. Guests crowded the railings, some pointing toward shore as if that would change anything. Melissa, the bride, was clutching the skirt of her gown, speaking in quick bursts to one of the officers. Her face was pale even in the dim light. Mark stood behind her, his jaw tight, his hand twitching at his cufflinks. Patricia and Cheryl were easy to spot, 2 maroon shapes on the bow, both talking at once, arms cutting through the air in wild gestures. The officers didn't look impressed. It took nearly 40 minutes for the patrol to turn the Silver Dawn back toward the harbor, but I stayed planted at the edge of the dock. By the time she reached the pier, word had spread. A crowd had gathered, phones in hand. recording as the yacht crept into her slip under the patrol's watchful escort. The first person down the gangway was Melissa. She didn't look at anyone, just hitched up her gown and strode straight onto the dock, her expression one of cold finality. Mark followed a few paces behind, trying to catch up, muttering something that only made her walk faster. Patricia was next, her cheeks blotchy, her hair a frizzed halo from the sea air. She spotted me immediately and marched over, Cheryl close on her heels. The crowd's murmur swelled. "You humiliated us," Patricia hissed. I let her words hang in the air, letting the tension coil tighter. "No," I said evenly. "You did that yourselves." Cheryl jabbed a finger at me. "We could have pressed charges for..." "What?" "For letting you drift." I interrupted. "You had my boat, my property. You paraded it around like it was your own. You ignored every warning I gave you. And you thought there'd be no consequences." Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. Around us, people were recording openly now, some even smirking. The Harbor Patrol officers stepped forward, their boots clanging against the dock. One of them held a clipboard. "We've documented the incident," he said to me. "Mr. Carter, do you wish to press charges for unauthorized use of your vessel?" Patricia's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. Cheryl's lips tightened into a thin line. The crowd went dead quiet. I looked at the officers, then at the sisters. "Not tonight," I said. "Tonight, they've had enough of a lesson." The officers nodded and stepped back. The murmur in the crowd returned, this time louder, tinged with a rustle of gossip taking root. Patricia tried to speak again, but I turned away. I walked down the dock to the Silver Dawn, running my hand along the railing. She'd been dressed like a circus act, but she was still mine, still solid, still seaworthy. Behind me, the sisters were swallowed by the crowd. I didn't need to see their faces to know what they looked like. Pride splintered, confidence gone brittle. They would tell their version of the story to anyone who'd listen, twisting the details, painting themselves as victims. But the videos people had recorded tonight would tell the truth. By the next morning, the clips were everywhere. One in particular, shot from the moment the Harbor Patrol arrived, had gone viral. The caption read, "When Karens steal your boat for a wedding and get escorted back by police." The HOA board issued fines for violating marina rules, for unauthorized use of private property, and for disturbing the peace. The total was enough to make even the Clarksons wince. They paid it, but not quietly. I heard the shouting match from across the street. Bookings for my charter business doubled that month. People wanted to know if they'd be riding the famous wedding yacht, and I didn't mind leaning into the notoriety. Every time I stepped onto the deck, I thought about that day, the flowers, the music, the way they'd looked when they realized they weren't coming back on their own terms. I never told them exactly how I'd done it, how I'd guided them just far enough for the tide and their own incompetence to take over. Some secrets are better kept. One evening, weeks later, I saw Patricia and Cheryl at the marina. They spotted me, but didn't approach. Instead, they turned sharply and walked the other way, their conversation cut short. I let them go. The sea has a way of reminding people where they stand. And for the Clarksons, it had stripped away the illusion of control they'd worn for years, leaving them exposed for everyone to see. As I stood on the dock, the Silver Dawn rocking gently at her berth, I couldn't help but think that somewhere out there, another tide was already turning. And when it reached them, I had no doubt they'd remember the day they learned what it meant to drift too far from shore.